Toupee King, we sit down with a man who perfected Sinatra's hairpiece as he dishes the dirt on which Hollywood hunks are covering up bald spots.
Old Hollywood always pretended everything was perfect. Perfect smiles, perfect marriages, perfect reputations, but the biggest illusion of them all? Hair. So many of the most glamorous stars were fighting losing battles with their follicles, and Hollywood covered it up with wigs, hairpieces, and studio magic. Today, we're counting down 15 golden age celebrities who were secretly bald or balding, but the public never knew. We've got stunt-grade hairpieces, custom wig arsenals, and stars who couldn't care less off-screen. Some of these hair routines were so extreme, you'll swear they were plotting heists, not movies. Stick around, because the higher we go, the wilder it gets. Let's start at number 15, because the tea only gets hotter from here. 15. Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster had the body of a Greek statue and the hairline of a man who'd already seen some things. His follicles started clocking out in his 20s, long before he hit leading man status. Because he built his brand on being the muscular acrobat who could leap off a mast and wrestle 5 pirates, the studios weren't about to let audiences clock what was happening up top. Lancaster wore industrial-strength, stunt-grade hairpieces engineered to survive fistfights, flips, and sword swings. His wig had its own call time. The moment a strand shifted, production froze. Cameras down, lights dimmed. Everybody waited while the hair team rushed in like pit crew mechanics. Hollywood guarded his baldness like a state secret. Insiders knew, the crew whispered, but Lancaster never went on record. His situation lives in that cloudy Hollywood rumor zone where multiple sources repeat the same story, but every detail lines up too neatly to be coincidence. If Burt needed stunt wigs, this next Golden Age legend said, "Forget all that," and just shaved his head completely. 14. Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner didn't just go bald, he embraced it so hard he became the blueprint for smooth-domed cool. Before The King and I, he had a thin, uneven fringe clinging on for the dear life. When the 1951 Broadway production asked him to shave it all for King Mongkut, he wasn't thrilled, but he took the plunge. The reaction? Instant. Electric. The audience loved it. Suddenly, the shaved head wasn't a liability. It was mysterious, exotic, commanding. Yul clocked the power immediately and made baldness his entire aesthetic. Brynner played King Mongkut 4,625 times on stage, plus the 1956 film, and kept the head shaved long after. He only wore wigs when scripts absolutely demanded it, and even then, you could tell he'd rather throw hands. The shaved head masked the early hair loss that pushed him toward the razor. Instead of battling baldness in secret, Brynner turned it into his superpower. While Yul embraced the shine, another beloved actor did the complete opposite, fighting baldness with a wig so intense it became part of his contract. 13. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra could command a stage with one note, but his hairline was staging its own slow exit. By his early 40s, old blue eyes juggled career pressure, a messy divorce from Ava Gardner, and fans literally yanking his hair like he was a souvenir stand. He started thinning faster than a Vegas bankroll at 3 a.m. Frank pivoted to custom-made toupees, the Rolls-Royces of hairpieces, hand-tied, color-matched. He reportedly kept around 30 of them, carried by an assistant whose whole job was toupee security. Concert wig, movie wig, Vegas wig with extra flair. A hairpiece for every mood, every lighting situation, every angle. If a strand shifted, everything paused until the hair was perfect. The Rat Pack could be running late, everything stopped for Frank's hair. Biographers back it up. Few signs of baldness early on, but once the 1950s stress hit, the density dip became impossible to ignore. Yet through the Rat Pack era, the hair stayed suspiciously consistent. If Old Blue Eyes needed an army of hairpieces to keep his legend intact, who was the suave Hollywood heartthrob whose hair was part of the performance, not a secret? 12. Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero was Hollywood flair personified. He wasn't hiding baldness, his hairline was fine. But the man knew how to make a statement. Romero used hairpieces and styling tricks to maintain his signature slicked-back look, giving him that effortlessly suave vibe in musicals, comedies, and the iconic 60s Batman series. Unlike stars who treated hairpieces as secrets, Romero's were part of the performance. The pieces added volume, allowed dramatic styling, and ensured every frame delivered charisma by the bucketful. Combined with his famous mustache, his hair cemented his image as the ultimate Hollywood ladies' man. While Romero treated his hairpiece like a co-star, our next beloved actor took a completely different approach, wearing wigs only when cameras rolled and couldn't care less what you thought the rest of the time. 11. James Stewart. James Stewart always came across like the guy who'd help you carry groceries and then apologize for taking too long. But even the most beloved good guy in Hollywood couldn't outrun the hairline gods. His hair started slipping during World War II. Stewart flew combat missions. When he came back in 1945, the tousled, boyish pre-war hair had thinned out fast. By the early 1950s, he quietly started wearing a toupee for movie roles. The key word, movie. Jimmy wasn't about to wear a hairpiece to grab milk. Off-screen, he often skipped it entirely. He was Jimmy Stewart. Charm was his real currency. The studios built him hair units, soft gray toupees designed to match his gentle everyman warmth. Nothing dramatic, just believable, slightly thinning but consistent hair. Pre-war photos show thick, messy hair. Post-war pictures? A noticeably different story, yet his on-screen hair stayed suspiciously stable across the 50s and 60s. And if Jimmy Stewart tried to keep things subtle, the next star wasn't subtle at all. His wig budget could have paid for an entire movie. 10. John Wayne. John Wayne looked like the kind of guy who could lasso a horse with one hand. But the one thing he couldn't wrangle? His hair. His hairline tapped out in his 20s, right when Hollywood started grooming him to be the face of the American West. By the time he started leading westerns, toupees were already part of the uniform. Wayne's wigs were engineered like frontier fortresses. If a gust of wind dared to shift a strand, production stopped cold. Crew members rushed in like they were defusing a bomb. But Wayne wasn't precious about it. He knew he was balding and wasn't hiding under the table. In Hollywood law, Wayne showed up to the governor's ball without his wig, just his real hairline, out in the open. It was his way of saying, "I play cowboys, I don't have to be one." For the movies, he wore the wig like armor. Off-screen, he could take it or leave it. And if John Wayne could drop the act for a night, the next Golden Age star went in the opposite direction, hiding his baldness so fiercely the studios practically wrote non-disclosure agreements around his scalp. 9. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis had the kind of face that made studio executives speak in tongues. The smolder, the jawline, the glossy dark curls. He looked born on a romance novel cover. But those famous waves were carrying the entire production on their backs. Curtis started getting sneaky with hair enhancements early. Not full wigs at first, just little pieces to fill in thin spots and make the curls look suspiciously perfect. You'd see him in a movie and swear he had shampoo commercial hair. By the late 60s and into the 70s, the truth became harder to finesse. The hairline was retreating, and Curtis wasn't about to let his heartthrob reputation go down with it. So he graduated to full-on wigs. Not sometimes, always. Wig season, year-round. The curls you grew up admiring were a group effort, but it worked. He kept the fantasy alive for decades. And if Tony Curtis relied on Hollywood glam, the next star on our list took things even further. Next up is a man whose tough guy swagger relied on more than trench coats and cigarette smoke. 8. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart started thinning in the 1930s, and the studios acted like his hairline was a national security secret. The man was basically born wearing a hairpiece and kept it on until the end. That toupee was as much a part of his brand as the fedora and gravelly voice. Directors played Twister, with lighting and camera angles just so nobody caught a glimpse of the truth. Meanwhile, the rest of us watching those close-ups can absolutely see the situation fighting for its life. But the sweetest part? His wife, Lauren Bacall, didn't care one bit. She loved him, wig or no wig, while studio heads probably had heart attacks anytime a breeze passed by. But if Bogart's hair was fragile, our next star's wig was practically a safety hazard. Who had to glue theirs on, like a craft project? 7. Sean Connery. Before you gasp, yes, Mr. Bond, James Bond himself wore a wig. Sean Connery didn't just walk onto the set as James Bond. He slept, fought, and seduced his way through every scene with a full head of hair that wasn't entirely his. By age 21, the man had already started losing it. But the world needed a suave, flawless 007. Enter the toupee. From Dr. No to Never Say Never Again, Connery's hairpieces were glued, blended, and water-tested like top-secret gadgets. Chases, stunts, explosions, even underwater sequences in Thunderball, that wig stayed put. Production crews treated those hairpieces as part of the special effects team. Connery never hid it. For Bond, the toupee was part of the costume. Off-screen, he embraced boldness later, even snagging and Alive in 1989. And if Connery could rock a glued-on hairline under pressure, the next star on our list, he danced, sang, and twirled through life with a toupee that had its own backstage entourage. 6. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire didn't just glide across the floor, he floated, spun, leaped, and twirled with hair that Hollywood would never admit was mostly engineered. From an early age, Astaire faced significant balding, but in true Fred fashion, he turned it into an illusion of effortless perfection. His toupees weren't just wigs, they were sweat-proof, action-ready hairpieces designed to survive every intricate shuffle, spin, and leap. Rehearsals, live performances, camera close-ups, or back-to-back takes, the hair stayed put, polished, and impeccable. Biographies confirm that throughout his career, Astaire's careful concealment allowed audiences to focus on his signature elegance, never the thinning strands beneath the lights. Off-camera, he handled things privately, whether removing them in his dressing room or in one legendary story, stomping a toupee after filming Blue Skies. And if Fred could dance through the toughest routines while keeping his hair flawless, what about the crooner who looked at his toupee and said, "Absolutely not," whenever humanly possible? 5. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby had the voice that could melt hearts and sell out concert halls, but his hairline? That started checking out somewhere around his 30s, right when he was becoming one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. By the time he was crooning through classics like White Christmas and countless TV specials, Crosby was relying on toupees. But here's the twist: he absolutely hated wearing them. Unlike stars who treated their hairpieces like precious cargo, Crosby found them uncomfortable and annoying. So he got creative. If a script could include a hat, nightcap, or any head covering, he'd push for it. Directors got used to working around his preference, slipping in fedoras, golf caps, and cozy bedtime scenes where a nightcap did all the heavy lifting. For formal scenes where bareheaded was unavoidable, the toupee came out. But the second he could ditch it, he did. Crosby wore those pieces like a man completing a chore, efficiently, begrudgingly, and with zero attachment. Crosby proved you didn't have to love the hairpiece to make it work, you just had to be smart enough to write around it. But if Bing Crosby could negotiate his way out of wig duty with a well-placed fedora, the next star on our list had no such luck. His image required perfection, and that meant the toupee stayed on no matter what. 4. Robert Taylor. Robert Taylor had that classic leading man look, sharp jawline, piercing eyes, and that famous widow's peak that made fans swoon. But by the late 1930s, the studio noticed he'd something troubling. His hairline was starting to retreat. Hollywood's solution? Toupees, of course. Taylor's wigs weren't just slapped on. MGM employed expert wig makers to craft pieces that blended flawlessly with his natural hair, maintaining his youthful charisma and enhancing that signature widow's peak. On set, these hairpieces were treated as essential props. Studio records and fan accounts confirm that Taylor's hair was meticulously managed, ensuring audiences never saw the reality beneath the gloss. The result? A career of smoldering screen presence and hair that seemed perfect from every angle. 3. Raymond Bailey. Raymond Bailey is one of those actors where you look at his early career, then look at him on the Beverly Hillbillies and go, wait, how did that happen? Because before he showed up as Milburn Drysdale, the slick, buttoned-up banker with a hairline sharp enough to cut glass, Bailey was fully bald on camera. No mystery, no illusion, nothing to ponder. Bald. He'd spent years playing character roles in films like Wake Island, 1942, and Vertigo, 1958. And nobody batted an eye at his lack of hair. It was just part of who Raymond Bailey was as an actor, reliable, professional, and completely follicle-free. But when sitcom fame came knocking, oh, he switched it up fast. Bailey's toupees on the Beverly Hillbillies weren't just props. They were practically cast members. Wardrobe kept those pieces groomed, brushed, steamed, and styled like they were about to walk the runway. The man didn't just wear a hairpiece, he wore a lifestyle. That smooth businessman look people remember, toupee magic from front to back. The transformation was so complete that it became essential to the character. Drysdale wasn't just a banker, he was the banker, polished and pristine. The kind of man who'd never let a hair fall out of place, even if Jethro crashed a truck through his office. The toupee gave him that untouchable, corporate sheen that made every scheming subplot land perfectly. And the funniest part? Audiences in the 60s had no idea. If you only knew him as Mr. Drysdale, you probably assumed he woke up with that tidy swirl every morning. Meanwhile, the second he stepped off set, Bailey went right back to his natural look. No fuss, no shame. He treated the hairpiece like a work uniform. Clock in, put it on, clock out, take it off, and live your life. So while other actors were panicking about hiding thinning hair, Bailey was out here doing a complete transformation. The wigs didn't just help him look the part, they created the part. Without that polished toupee, Drysdale wouldn't have had half the "I run this bank" energy. Bailey proved you could go from bald character actor to leading sitcom star with nothing more than good comedy timing and an excellent wig budget. But if Raymond Bailey wore his toupee like a costume he happily left at work, what about the comedy legend who turned his hairpiece into the punchline itself? 2. Carl Reiner. Carl Reiner wasn't just wearing a toupee, he was weaponizing it. While half of Hollywood was out here treating hairpieces like state secrets, Reiner looked at his thinning hair, shrugged, and said, "You know what? Let's make this funny." On the Dick Van Dyke Show, his character Alan Brady didn't just have a wig, he had an ego attached to that wig. The writers built entire storylines around his hairpiece paranoia, and Reiner leaned into it like a pro. The most iconic moment? The episode where Brady's bald head gets exposed on live TV. Other actors would have fainted. Reiner turned it into sitcom history. And off-screen? Same energy. Reiner's toupees were neatly styled and part of his everyday look as he went from writing rooms to award shows, but he never pretended it was his natural hair. He treated the whole thing like an accessory. Glasses, watch, toupee done. No mystery, no scandal, no dramatic studio cover-ups. If someone asked about it, he'd probably crack a joke before they even finished the question. This was a man who created one of television's greatest sitcoms, wrote for Sid Caesar's legendary Your Show of Shows, directed classics like Oh God, and racked up 11 Emmys along the way. He had nothing to prove to anyone, least of all about his hair. The toupee was just part of the uniform for a guy who spent decades making America laugh. Reiner basically did the unthinkable. In an era where baldness was a PR crisis, he made the toupee the joke, not the shame. While his colleagues were out here sweating under Max Factor glue, Reiner was cracking jokes about his own hairline and cashing Emmy checks. 1. William Shatner. William Shatner didn't just wear a toupee, he launched one into sci-fi legend. When he stepped onto the Star Trek set as Captain Kirk, the hairpiece was practically a co-star. Production notes from the era talk about it like it was part of the special effects department, sturdy, reliable, and shockingly good at surviving whatever chaos Kirk threw himself into. Phaser battles? Fine. Wrestling rubber suit aliens? Still flawless. Those dramatic sideways Kirk rolls? Not a strand moved. Shatner joked later that his early pieces looked like tobacco pouches, but the studio's glam squad kept upgrading him until the hairline was slick enough for Space Command. And unlike other actors who treated their wigs like government secrets, Shatner leaned into the whole thing with that classic Shatner wink. He knew the hairpiece had a fan club of its own. Across the original series and all the movies that followed, the toupee evolved right along with Kirk. More volume here, sharper swoop there, always camera ready. Honestly, that hairpiece traveled more galaxies than most humans. So there you have it. 15 Golden Age icons who proved that Hollywood's greatest magic trick wasn't special effects or set design. It was hair. Which star's wig situation shocked you the most? Did we miss anyone you think deserves a spot on this list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this peek behind the curtain of old Hollywood's best-kept secrets, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we've got plenty more Golden Age tea to spill. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.